everybody. Contact Center KPI Podcast. My name is Greg Reffner, and with us today we have Tonia Brown, the VP of Compliance at First Credit Services. Before we get into our topic today, Tonia, please take a moment, introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background, and maybe share a little bit, kind of a sneak peek as to why compliance is such an important topic for you.
Sure. Well, I started in first party healthcare years and years and years ago. Don't even remember when it's been so long. And the company I was working for got bought, and part of the call center that I worked for moved out of state. So I decided I was going to go work for a smaller group. I got laid off in 2008 when the market went ridiculous, and ended up at a third-party debt collection agency that was quite small, that's located here in Nashville where I'm at. And we grew that company to over 200 people. And during that time, I managed human resources, client services, compliance, and just pretty much everything back office. So 13 years there, and I left there as executive vice president and decided I wanted to consult, and I did that for a couple of years, and now I'm at First Credit Services as their VP of compliance.
Nice. So you have experience in first party, third party, different kind of size organizations. You've been through some
Sure.
acquisitions. So you've kind of seen a little bit of everything.
Yeah, debt buying as well. So, debt buying, debt brokering, pretty much all aspects of your bad debt.
Nice. Okay. Well, so that definitely gives you the background to kind of talk about our topic today, which is going to be top 5 compliance requirements. And we're gonna focus a little bit more. We're gonna drill down a little bit more specifically around size of organization. So depending upon the size of the company you're at, your ability to focus on specific things may or may not kind of be impacted by the resources that you have available to you, right? If you have an entire
Right.
team of QA and compliance folks, maybe those topics or those areas of focus is much larger. Whereas if you're a one person compliance QA analyst, you might have 20 agents you're trying to service, and you're focused on 2 things that are going to keep you guys from getting sued,
Right.
and probably a mix of everything in between. So let's dive into that a little bit. So
Sure.
when we're talking about this, kind of brainstorming this topic, Tonia, we kind of started to quickly realize there were differences, which led to this topic. So let's focus first on maybe like sub 200 employees. Let's call it like a decent sized call center. It's not thousands, but you have a couple hundred agents maybe. Or do you want to start smaller? Do you want to maybe start even smaller than
It
that?
doesn't it doesn't matter. Because when you're looking at an agency that has 100 or more employees, you're pretty much going to be looking at the same compliance standards. You just may not have as many staff as you would, and for agencies that are larger, you generally have more revenue, so you can invest in different technology products that will help you manage pieces of your compliance in a more effective and efficient manner. If you're
Yeah.
small and you don't have, the huge purse strings, you don't have the ability to invest in as much in terms of IT and well, not necessarily IT, but the products that you can use for compliance that are technology based.
So let's throw a little bit of curveball into our topic here because you mentioned technology,
Yeah.
kind of investment in tech a couple times there. Um, Here at Abstract, we see even smaller companies looking at tech as a way to almost act as an accelerator of not having, or as a tool to not have to hire more people. Where at some
hmm
larger companies, some of the times the answer is throw more bodies at the problem because technology might be a little bit harder to implement. So, in your experience, have you found that maybe technology and investment in technology makes a greater impact at a larger company? Or is it just that's when they start having the money to buy that technology to help with compliance?
When the technology works, it's because you've invested the time to learn how to use it correctly. So there, there are a whole lot of people, agencies that have technology, regardless of their size, but they don't know how to get the most out of it. So, learning what all your technology can do for you is probably the most important piece of technology implementation at all. What that old Janet Jackson, what have you done for me lately? That's that's kind of what you need to be saying to your technology providers, right? Like, explain to me how this is going to make me more effective, more efficient, save me time, save me money. And I think now that we've gotten a whole lot of players in that technology realm in revenue cycle, we're seeing that the smaller agencies are trying to dip into that pool of technology, because they do see that if you have a compliance department of one, which a lot of businesses do, right? Because they don't generally see compliance as a revenue generating department. So if you're a compliance department of one or two, and you've got, 60 agents, and, more clients than you would think, because some small agencies have a ton of clients. They just, they don't have a huge compliance department that's monitoring the calls in the way they should,
Yeah.
and that's a big piece, in my opinion, is the call monitoring, because you want to make sure that your collectors are doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not violating laws, regulations, or company policies, and that they're, being respectful, and, all of those little things that they're supposed to be doing on the phone. And if you are a small agency, but you have speech analytics tools, then you have probably three extra people, technically, that are listening for, keywords and phrases that will help you stay on top of that. It's just figuring out what you're willing to spend or what you're willing to lose if
Yeah.
you don't.
Yeah. It's like the whole vitamin or painkiller thing. Do you want to like avoid the pain, or do you just want to like numb the pain?
Yeah,
And which side of the coin do you fall on that?
right.
Um, so let's kind of start diving in a little bit. So we talked about maybe a smaller team with one or two compliance folks. What are the top things that those size orgs with one or two folks, maybe they have some technology in place, maybe not, but what are some of the main things you're focusing on when you have like one or two people kind of trying to handle a team of, in your example, 60 agents on the phone?
So, compliance's role with any company, regardless of what it is to mitigate risk, right?
Hmm.
That's our goal. So, you need to look at your business as a whole, figure out where your top risk areas are, and focus on, putting together documented policies and procedures, making sure that you have adequate training, that that you're providing the support that those different departments are going to need to be risk adverse, so that you can collect, but collect it right, or do your job right, and still, be efficient and effective.
Yeah, okay. So I would agree with you, mitigate risk, right? So many of our
Hmm.
customers will say, it's better to be safe than sued. And so a large part of what they focus on are how
Hmm.
do we avoid getting sued? Um, have you seen companies at maybe a smaller size make the mistake of not putting enough focus on things like that, and all they care about is, those collections, bringing those
Yeah.
payments in, and they maybe turn a blind eye to maybe some of the riskier things that they should be trying to not do?
I have seen that. You don't see it as much now as you did 15 years ago or
Yeah.
20 years ago. It's, it's not as prevalent, especially in debt collection and debt buying, to have agencies that just kind of cowboy it up and, get out there and try to, let's do this and see what happens. That doesn't happen as much as it used to. I know that, there are some agencies that are willing to accept more risk than others. And right now, that's probably anybody who collects medical debt. That's got a big target on it
Those are
from the
huge.
CFPB,
Yeah.
from the states, so um, I do think that more companies now, especially with the inception of the CFPB, are paying attention to compliance in a way that they never did before, whether they
And
want to
so,
or not.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So it's almost like a forcing function, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost, whether you're smaller or big, and that's all relative, like you almost have to find a way to to deploy a force multiplier, whether it's adding humans, adding technology, because there are consequences for not non-compliance. Um,
Yeah, and the consequences for non-compliance are going to be a whole lot worse than the money that you're going to spend to be compliant. I
Totally.
mean,
Yeah.
we've had agencies that have been shut down in the last few years, because they weren't doing things compliantly. So if you build your compliance department and start internally, work on staff, work on policies and procedures, and I have a couple of things that I want to throw out there too after I say this. But you can use technology as additional personnel if you understand how it works, use it correctly, and use it to your advantage.
Yeah.
Um, we had talked about like the top things that every compliance department should have, right? So I want to throw those things out there. One of the first things and this is all my opinion. Let me throw that out there. I'm a compliance person, but I'm not your compliance person. So that's my attorney
This is
disclaimer
this is
right there.
not legal advice, and will not be taken as legal advice. Yep.
Correct. Correct. So you need a knowledgeable compliance person, whether that's a chief compliance officer, a director, a manager. You need someone that's knowledgeable, someone that stays up to date on changes in regulatory legal requirements. You also need a documented CMS. So a compliance management system, right? So that's your structured framework that contains the requirements and the responsibilities of your compliance department. Included in that is my number 3 thing, which is executive leadership and oversight. So you've got to have your executive leadership holding your compliance person, your head of compliance, responsible for the for meeting and exceeding or working through what's been mandated through your compliance management system. You have to have documented policies and procedures. And that requires cooperation from every department, right? Because I could sit here today and write policies for accounting and IT and, but do they mean anything? Absolutely not, because I don't know what I'm doing in those departments, right? So you have to learn to work together as a cohesive team to produce and train on and sort of build your armor with your policies and procedures. And then the last thing that I think is one of the most important pieces at all is to have an internal audit process. Nobody wants a regulator or a client to be the one that finds out you have a hole in a process, right? So internal audit allows your organization to be proactive in, testing out your policies and your procedures and your processes to make sure that they work and they operate. And then as the head of compliance, you have the responsibility of working with your qualified individual, which just became a requirement under the Safeguards Act, right? To provide reports to your board of directors or executive leadership on what your risk level is, where your risks have been identified, and what you believe you can do to mitigate those in the future.
That's a lot of good stuff. And it also so I think what I hear though is that when you say like you gotta have a compliance officer, um, at a bigger company that might be one person. In a
Hmm.
smaller company, that might be a subset of one person's job.
Right.
And so is it fair to say, Tanya, that those five things they're going to be the same across across organizations of all sizes.
Hmm.
How they are kind of who maintains the responsibility for those might change. You might have multiple roles. You might be wearing multiple hats. You
Right.
might have a team of folks that are responsible for internal audits as opposed to one person because the team has their day job that they do, Monday through Friday.
Hmm.
Is that a fair way to look at it?
Yes, in some instances, that's exactly the way it works. The only thing that the CFPB defined is that the your head of compliance should report to the board of directors or to the highest executive team member of your team, right? So the reason for that is because it muddies the water if you've got the fox guarding the hen house, right?
Totally conflict of
So
interest.
yeah, so that's kind of why that is. And that's, the only guidance, I guess, that they give us on who should do those things is that compliance doesn't report to operations. It reports to your CEO, to your board of directors, however that works. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think, the biggest issue that I saw when I was consulting was that you would have some really small organizations that only collected two or three different lines of debt, and they would try to have a 1,000-page policy manual, or
And no one's
a
ever going to read.
yeah, right. Or an internal audit that was bigger than, a Fortune 500 company would, so you have to right size. And in the reverse of that, I saw some companies that should have had, a pretty extensive policy manual, a pretty extensive internal audit, and they didn't even have one. so it's understanding what's right for your size of business and for the type of business you are. With debt collection, it's, well, what kind of debt is it? And if it's everything, because I hear that a lot, we collect everything. Well, if you do, if you do collect everything, then, how do you separate government debt from everybody else's debt? Are you collecting IRS debt? Because if so, there are certain things you've got to have, listed on that. Are there student loans? Are they private? There's a lot of things to ask in terms of what kind of debt you collect, and especially now with healthcare too. So,
Yeah, and I think it's, you see the direction of the economy and credit card lines are
mhm.
going up. Health, I know, um, health, I think was it student loans were kind of forgiven off of credit scores for a long time, and then just last month or this month, they started to impact credit scores again. So you're going to
Mhm.
see just, I think, a continuance of more and more, or agencies branching out into different types of debt that they want to go and collect. And so with that becomes a consideration of, you know,
Mhm.
how are we handling the delineation between let's call it church and state, compliance versus operations. And
Right.
um, yeah, but it's a good advice that we do have those foundational elements, and then kind of those just have to be right sized based upon the type of company. And so I think that's the big takeaway for me, and I would encourage our listeners to kind of go back and look at those five elements. Your CMS, who is compliance reporting to these types of things to go like, hey, have we checked those boxes? And does this make sense for our type of company, right? Is our employee handbook shorter than our document over here that outlines our compliance? If so, we should
Right.
probably take a look at that. Cool. So any kind of, I like to always end, Tanya, with, if there's one thing to not do, right? Don't ever do this. As it pertains to compliance, like what would that one thing be that you just is like, yeah, this is not going to end well for you?
Don't just think that you can send letters and text messages and emails or start chat without having someone, making sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's. And I mean, that's the big thing right now is consumer communication. We're
Oh
in
yeah,
a whole new realm of that for debt collection. When I started, it was phone books and Rolodexes, and now we're texting, we're emailing, we're having chat bots and trying to figure out how to use AI. And I mean, there's just a lot. But don't put yourself in a situation where you become that test case. Don't
totally.
don't do that.
You you don't want your case as the precedent that everybody refers
No,
back to in 10 years from now.
no. That's
Yeah.
true.
It's very true, right? And there's with technology advancing, so quickly, you almost need to have somebody who pays attention to what's going on with
Oh yeah.
technology and how it's used and needs to consider, right? Like you can't just be like, oh, we're going to start using AI today, and all of a sudden, like people are like, ooh, this is not going
Yeah.
so well. I appreciate the time today, Tanya. This has been, I
Thank
think, really
you.
impactful and a good reminder as to maybe some of the foundational elements that are not like incredibly sexy to talk about, but are the foundation for a successful
Mhm.
business and financial services and debt recovery. So really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm insanely jealous that you took this from outside in gorgeous weather.
I live in the woods. It's the best way to do it.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. Well, thank you again for your time today, Tanya.
Thank you.